Some people pass through a man's life like a season, pleasant, temporary, forgettable. And then there is you. You don't arrive loudly. You don't try to impress. You don't beg to be chosen. You arrive as truth, as calm, as something real in a world full of performance. And that's why you are the kind of love men don't recover from, not because you tried harder, but because you changed something inside him. This isn't about manipulation. It's not about control. It's about transformation. Let me show you how your presence, your way of loving, and your inner strength can transform a man's life forever. You loved him without losing yourself, and that alone changed everything. Because most people don't know how to do that. They think love means sacrifice in the loudest way possible. Giving until there's nothing left, shrinking dreams, softening boundaries, swallowing discomfort just to keep someone close. They confuse endurance with devotion. But you didn't. You showed him something quieter, stronger, rarer. You chose to love without disappearing. You didn't erase your voice to make him comfortable. You didn't abandon your values just to avoid conflict. You didn't pretend you were okay when you weren't, just to keep the peace. You understood, maybe instinctively, that love should add to your life, not hollow it out. That real connection doesn't demand self-destruction as proof of loyalty. And that's what made you unforgettable. Because when a man meets someone who knows who she is, who doesn't cling or collapse, something inside him pauses. He feels it before he understands it. There's a different energy in the room, a calm confidence, a sense that this person is choosing him, not needing him to survive. And that changes the dynamic entirely. You weren't there to be rescued. You weren't there to be completed. You were already whole. Psychologists talk about this as secure attachment, but you didn't need the terminology to live it. Secure people don't love from fear. They don't grip tighter when things feel uncertain. They don't trade authenticity for approval. They show up honestly, and they expect honesty in return. And when that expectation isn't met, they don't beg. They observe. They decide you did that. You loved him deeply, but you didn't orbit around him. You had your own gravity, your own life, your own passions, routines, friendships, and silence. You didn't make him the center of your universe. And paradoxically, that's what made him feel significant, because he knew he wasn't there by default. He was there by choice. There's a moment every man remembers, even if he never talks about it. A moment when he realizes the woman in front of him isn't trapped. She could leave, not in a dramatic way, not as a threat, but as a fact. And instead of making him feel powerful, it humbles him, because he knows the connection exists only as long as he shows up with integrity. That awareness stays. You didn't punish him with distance. You didn't manipulate him with affection. You didn't use love as currency. You offered it freely, but not recklessly. And that balance is disarming. It creates respect before it creates desire. And respect, once lost, is almost impossible to rebuild. You understood that even if you never said it out loud. When you said no, you said it calmly. When you needed space, you took it without guilt. When something hurt you, you named it without cruelty. That kind of emotional clarity is rare because it requires self-trust. And self-trust is intimidating to anyone who hasn't learned to face themselves. You didn't chase reassurance. You didn't need constant validation. And that didn't make you cold. It made you grounded. You could enjoy closeness without suffocating it. You could stand alone without resentment. You showed him that intimacy doesn't mean invasion, and independence doesn't mean disconnection. That's a lesson most people only learn after years of loss. There's data that backs this up. Studies show that relationships where both partners maintain a strong sense of self tend to last longer and feel more satisfying. Not because there's less conflict, but because conflict doesn't threaten identity. When someone knows who they are, disagreements don't feel like erasure. They feel like conversation, growth, adjustment. You brought that energy into the relationship, whether he was ready for it or not. And here's the part that matters most. You didn't do this to teach him. You didn't do it to prove a point. You did it because you respected yourself. That's why the impact lingers. Men often say they miss the woman who didn't need them, but what they're really saying is they miss how they felt around her. Less defensive, more capable, more seen. Your wholeness invited him to rise, not because you demanded it, but because it felt natural to meet you at your level. And even if he didn't rise fast enough, even if he fumbled, even if he lost you, the memory doesn't fade. Because once someone experiences love that doesn't require self-betrayal, they can't unknow it. Every future connection is measured against that feeling. Every compromise feels heavier. Every imbalance becomes more obvious. He may not articulate it. He may not admit it. But somewhere deep inside, he knows what healthy love feels like now. And it came from you. You showed him that love isn't about proving worth through suffering. It's not about endurance medals or emotional martyrdom. It's about two whole people choosing to walk together without stepping on each other's souls. You didn't lose yourself to love, and that's why losing you felt so profound. Because he didn't just lose a relationship. He lost access to a version of love that was steady, honest, and strong enough to stand on its own. And that kind of love doesn't get replaced, it gets remembered. You saw him not just as he was, but as he could become, and that kind of vision reaches places words never touch. Most people look at someone and judge the surface, the habits, the mistakes, the unfinished edges, and they decide that's the whole story. You didn't. You looked deeper, past the noise of the present moment, past the version of him that was still learning how to stand, and you saw a future he hadn't fully met yet. That doesn't mean you were blind. You saw his flaws clearly. You noticed the hesitation, the self-sabotage, the ways fear disguised itself as indifference or pride. You didn't confuse potential with fantasy. You simply understood that people are not static. That growth is not linear. That who someone is becoming matters just as much as who they are today. And so you treated him like someone capable of more. That changes a person, quietly, profoundly. There's a psychological truth behind this, something researchers call the Pygmalion effect. When someone is consistently treated as competent, capable, and meaningful, they begin to act in ways that align with those expectations, not because they're pressured, but because belief creates permission. You didn't nag him to change. You didn't shame him for not being there yet. You spoke to the part of him that wanted to rise, even when the rest of the world was still talking to his limitations. Think about how rare that is. Most people focus on what's missing. They criticize, compare, point out what hasn't been achieved. You didn't ignore reality, but you didn't trap him inside it either. You acknowledged where he was, and at the same time, you held space for where he could go. That balance is powerful. It says, I see you as you are, and I trust that you are more than this moment. That trust stays with a man. You notice the small signs before they became obvious. The discipline he showed in one area of his life. The way he protected what mattered even imperfectly. The way he lit up when he talked about something meaningful. You reflected those things back to him, not as flattery, but as recognition. And recognition is fuel. It tells someone they're not invisible, that their effort is seen, that their becoming is noticed. There's a story many men share years later, often quietly. They talk about one person who believed in them before success, before confidence, before certainty. Not someone who pushed or controlled, but someone who looked at them and spoke as if growth was inevitable. Those men don't forget that voice. Even when they try to outrun it, it echoes. You became that voice. You didn't lower the standard to keep him comfortable. You didn't excuse behavior that didn't align with his best self. When he fell short, you didn't attack his character, but you didn't pretend it didn't matter either. You addressed actions, not identity. You separated who he was from what he did. That distinction is everything. It allows accountability without shame, growth without collapse. That kind of respect is transformative. You spoke to him like someone who could handle the truth. And when people are trusted with truth, they either rise to it or they walk away from it. Either way, something shifts. You didn't chase the outcome. You simply stayed aligned with what you saw was possible. There were moments when he surprised himself around you, moments when he was more disciplined, more honest, more present than he'd been before. He might not have connected the dots at the time, but you felt it. You could sense that your belief was acting like a mirror, reflecting back a version of him he hadn't fully claimed. That's not control, that's influence. And influence rooted in respect lasts longer than influence rooted in fear. You didn't rescue him. You didn't try to fix him. You understood that no one grows because they're dragged forward. Growth happens when someone feels seen, challenged, and trusted at the same time. You provided that environment simply by being who you are. There's data that supports this too. Studies on motivation show that people perform better and persist longer when they feel internally motivated rather than externally pressured. Your belief didn't suffocate him. It expanded him. It gave him room to choose growth instead of rebelling against it. And even when he didn't choose it fast enough, even when he hesitated, even when fear won a few rounds, the seed was already planted. That's the part people underestimate. Potential, once seen, doesn't disappear. You can ignore it, delay it, bury it under distractions, but it doesn't die. It waits. And every time he faces a moment where he has to choose between comfort and growth, your presence shows up in his memory. Not as a voice telling him what to do, but as a feeling reminding him what's possible. You didn't just believe in him when it was easy. You believed in him when he doubted himself, when his past whispered limitations, when failure made him question his own capacity. You didn't deny the struggle. You simply refused to let it define him completely. That refusal becomes a reference point. Men often measure themselves against who they once were allowed to be. When someone has seen their potential clearly, settling feels heavier, mediocrity feels louder, excuses don't land the same way. Even if the relationship ends, the internal standard remains. You raise that standard, not through pressure, but through presence, through the way you listened without dismissing his dreams, through the way you responded to setbacks with perspective instead of panic, through the way you held him accountable without reducing him to his worst moments. That's why losing you doesn't just feel like losing a person. It feels like losing a future version of themselves that only existed fully in your eyes. And here's the quiet truth beneath it all. You didn't see his potential because you were naive. You saw it because you see potential in yourself. People who don't believe in growth can't recognize it in others. Your vision came from self-awareness, from having done your own inner work, from knowing that becoming is a lifelong process. That's why your belief carried weight. And even if he never said thank you, even if he never fully lived up to what you saw, the impact remains because you didn't just love the man he was, you honored the man he was becoming. And that kind of love leaves an imprint that time doesn't erase. You brought peace, not chaos, and in a world addicted to noise, that alone made you unforgettable. Most people confuse intensity with connection. They believe love has to be loud, dramatic, constantly on edge to feel real. Raised voices, emotional swings, endless tests of loyalty, those things get mistaken for passion. You didn't play that game. You understood something deeper. That real love doesn't feel like a battlefield. It feels like a place where you can finally exhale. When you walked into his life, things didn't speed up. They slowed down. Conversations felt steadier. Moments felt grounded. Even silence felt safe. You weren't trying to provoke reactions or pull emotions out of him just to feel chosen. You were present, and that presence carried calm. Not the kind that numbs, but the kind that stabilizes. There's science behind this, even if you never named it. When someone feels emotionally safe, their nervous system relaxes. Stress hormones drop. The body stops bracing for impact. That's when real bonding happens. That's when people begin to associate a person not just with attraction, but with relief. You became that relief. He might not have noticed it right away. Peace doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It's subtle. But over time, he felt it in his body. The way his shoulders dropped around you, the way his breathing slowed, the way he didn't feel like he had to perform or defend himself. You didn't interrogate his every mood. You didn't turn misunderstandings into power struggles. You listened to understand, not to win. That's rare. You didn't make problems bigger than they were. When something felt off, you addressed it directly without theatrics. You didn't store resentment just to release it later in an emotional explosion. You understood that clarity is kinder than chaos, that calm conversations can hold more truth than shouting ever could. And because of that, he trusted you. Maybe not immediately, maybe not perfectly, but gradually he realized that being honest with you didn't come with punishment. That vulnerability wouldn't be used against him later. That mistakes didn't automatically mean rejection. You created an environment where openness felt possible. Many men don't grow up with that. They learn early that emotions are risky. That saying the wrong thing can cost them connection. That silence is safer than honesty. So when they encounter someone who doesn't weaponize feelings, who doesn't twist words, something inside them softens. They begin to open doors they didn't know how to unlock before. You didn't push those doors open. You waited. And waiting with patience is a form of strength. You also knew when to be quiet. You didn't fill every pause with anxiety. You didn't interpret every silence as abandonment. You trusted the space between words, and that trust allowed depth to form. It allowed him to think, to feel, to come forward in his own time. There's a reason so many people say they miss the peace more than the person. Peace isn't something you can replace easily. Excitement can be recreated. Chemistry can be found again. But emotional safety, that's earned. That's built slowly through consistency and restraint. You offered that without keeping score. You didn't create chaos to feel alive. You didn't need emotional storms to confirm importance. You were steady, and steadiness is powerful because it's dependable. It says, you don't have to brace yourself here. It says you can rest. Rest is transformative. There were moments when he was overwhelmed by life, work, expectations, pressure, fear. And when he came to you, the world didn't get louder. It got quieter. You didn't immediately jump into fixing mode unless he asked. You didn't minimize his stress. You simply stayed present. Sometimes that meant listening. Sometimes that meant sitting beside him in silence. That kind of support teaches someone they don't have to carry everything alone. And once someone experiences that, they crave it. You didn't drain his energy. You restored it. That's a difference people don't talk about enough. Some connections feel exciting but exhausting. Others feel calm and nourishing. The body knows the difference, even when the mind resists it. His body learned to associate you with balance. That association doesn't fade easily. You also didn't use chaos as leverage. You didn't create distance to provoke pursuit. You didn't pull away to test his attachment. You didn't turn emotions into tools. You were consistent. Your affection didn't vanish as punishment. Your care wasn't conditional on perfect behavior. That reliability built trust in ways dramatic gestures never could. And trust changes people. When someone knows they won't be punished for being human, they become more accountable, not less. They want to do better, not because they're afraid of losing you, but because they respect the space you've created. You made growth feel safe instead of forced. Even during conflict, you stayed grounded. You didn't attack his character. You spoke about what you felt, what you needed, what mattered to you. You didn't escalate to gain control. You de-escalated to find understanding. That takes courage. It's easier to react than to respond. You chose response. That choice left a mark. After you, arguments felt different to him. Louder, more chaotic, less productive. He noticed the contrast. He might not have said it out loud, but his nervous system recognized it. Other connections didn't feel as safe, not because those people were bad, but because what you offered was rare. You taught him that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. That consistency isn't boring. That calm doesn't mean lack of passion. It means depth. It means maturity. It means two people choosing to regulate themselves instead of regulating each other. And even if he walked away, even if timing, fear, or immaturity got in the way, the peace you brought stayed with him. Because once someone knows what it feels like to be emotionally safe, chaos becomes harder to tolerate. Games feel louder, drama feels heavier, instability feels unnecessary. You didn't just love him, you gave him a nervous system reset. You showed him that connection can be gentle and strong at the same time, that love can feel like a place to rest without losing momentum. That presence doesn't need to be proven through pain, and that lesson lives on, quietly guiding him long after you're gone. You walked away with dignity when necessary, and that choice spoke louder than anything you ever said while staying. Because leaving isn't what breaks a man, how someone leaves does. And you didn't leave in chaos. You didn't leave screaming, begging, or trying to prove a point. You didn't scorch the earth behind you to feel powerful. You simply chose yourself calmly, clearly, and without losing your humanity. That kind of exit is unforgettable. Most people think dignity is silence, but it's not. Dignity is alignment. It's knowing when something no longer honors your values and refusing to betray yourself just to keep someone close. You didn't storm out to scare him into changing. You didn't threaten distance as a weapon. You understood that real boundaries don't shout, they stand. And standing takes courage. Because staying would have been easier. Staying would have meant familiarity, comfort, excuses. Staying would have meant convincing yourself that love should hurt a little, that patience means endurance without limits. But you knew the difference between commitment and self-erasure. You knew that love without respect eventually becomes self-abandonment. So when the moment came, you didn't dramatize it. You didn't list every wrong he ever did. You didn't try to make him understand everything all at once. You didn't need closure shaped like an apology. You've simply recognized that what you were giving and what you were receiving no longer matched. And you chose integrity over attachment. That choice disrupts something deep inside a man because it removes the illusion of control. It shows him that love is not something he can neglect indefinitely and still keep. It introduces consequence without cruelty, and that's where reflection begins. Research backs this up. Studies on regret show that people experience deeper, longer-lasting regret when they lose something valuable due to their own inaction rather than external conflict. You didn't give him a villain to blame. You didn't explode in a way that allowed him to say, it had to end. You left him with clarity, and clarity has a way of echoing. You didn't punish him. You didn't disappear to be chased. You didn't leave breadcrumbs to keep him emotionally hooked. You closed the door gently, but firmly. That finality wasn't cold. It was clean, and clean endings are the hardest ones to process, because there's nothing to fight against. You didn't destroy the good memories. You didn't rewrite history to justify your departure. You honored what was real, and you honored what wasn't enough. That balance creates cognitive dissonance. He can't reduce you to a stereotype. He can't label you as dramatic or unreasonable. He has to sit with the truth someone loving, patient, and grounded chose to walk away. That realization matures slowly, sometimes painfully. In the days after, he might have felt relief, freedom, space, people often do. But dignity doesn't reveal its weight immediately. It shows up later, in quiet moments, in comparison, in hindsight, when he realizes that no one else leaves like that. No one else walks away without trying to wound him on the way out. No one else holds themselves with that kind of self-respect under emotional pressure. You didn't try to be remembered. You simply were. And that's what makes it linger. There's a subtle power in not needing to be understood to make a decision. You didn't wait for validation. You didn't require agreement. You trusted yourself enough to walk forward without applause. That level of self-trust is confronting. It forces others to examine where they compromise themselves just to avoid loss. You didn't shame him for his shortcomings. You didn't label him as broken or unworthy. You separated his inability to meet you from his value as a person. That distinction matters. It prevents defensiveness. It invites reflection. It leaves the door open for growth, even if you're no longer there to witness it. That's dignity. You also didn't rush into proving you were fine. You didn't perform healing. You didn't use another relationship to erase him. You took your space honestly. You processed the loss instead of masking it. And that authenticity adds weight to your absence. Because he knows you didn't leave lightly. You left deliberately. That's the part that stays with him. Men often recover quickly from relationships that end explosively. Anger numbs pain. Conflict creates distance. But when someone leaves with grace, there's nothing to distract from the truth. No adrenaline, no drama, just loss. And loss, when faced without distraction, changes people. You showed him that love isn't about tolerating less than you deserve. That walking away can be an act of self-respect, not rejection. That choosing yourself doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you cared enough about your own soul to protect it. That lesson doesn't disappear, even if he dates again, even if he moves on, even if he pretends it didn't matter. Somewhere inside, he carries the memory of a woman who didn't beg him to become better, but who also refused to settle for less. A woman who loved deeply and left cleanly. A woman who proved that standards don't need to be loud to be firm. You didn't collapse on the way out. You walked upright. And that posture becomes a reference point. Every future relationship gets measured against it. Every boundary gets compared. Every compromise feels heavier when he remembers someone who didn't trade their self-worth for connection. You didn't try to teach him a lesson, but he learned one anyway. That love is not guaranteed. That access to you is a privilege, not a right. That presence has value. And that once it's gone, it doesn't return just because someone finally understands. You left him with the most powerful thing anyone can leave another human being with. Respect. Not demanded, not negotiated, demonstrated. And that kind of departure doesn't fade with time. It settles, it matures, it reshapes how someone understands love, loss, and responsibility. You didn't just walk away. You showed him how. You taught him what real love actually is, not by explaining it, not by defining it, but by living it in front of him every single day. Real love isn't a speech. It isn't a promise made in a perfect moment. It's a pattern, a presence, a way of showing up when no one is watching. And you showed him something he didn't even realize he had been missing. Before you, love might have felt like intensity, like uncertainty, like highs followed by long stretches of confusion. He might have thought love was supposed to hurt a little, demand a little chaos, keep him guessing just enough to feel alive. Many people grow up believing that instability is passion and that calm means boredom. You quietly dismantled that belief. You showed him that love can be steady without being dull, that it can be deep without being painful, that it can be strong without being controlling. You didn't love him by possession. You loved him by choice. Every day, you didn't try to own his time, his thoughts, his world. You didn't make him feel guilty for having a life outside of you. Instead, you respected his independence while offering your presence. And that balance taught him something essential, that real love doesn't cage you. It supports you. It doesn't shrink your world. It expands it. There's a moment most men experience only once, sometimes never again, when they realize they are loved without condition, but not without standards. That's what you gave him. You didn't withdraw affection to punish him. You didn't give love only when he performed correctly. You cared consistently, but you also expected consistency in return. That combination is rare. It says, "You matter and so do I." And that message rewires how someone understands connection. You taught him that love is not about constant reassurance. You didn't need to be chased to feel valued. You didn't need dramatic gestures to feel secure. You trusted what was built between you. And that trust invited him to relax into himself, to stop posturing, to stop pretending, to stop guarding every vulnerability like it was a liability. Around you, he could be human. He could be uncertain without being judged. He could be quiet without being accused. He could be imperfect without being reduced to his flaws. You didn't confuse mistakes with identity. You understood that people are learning as they go. That love grows best in environments where error doesn't equal rejection. That understanding changes a person. You also taught him that love listens. Not to respond, not to correct, not to win, but to understand. When he spoke, you were present. When he struggled to articulate himself, you didn't rush him. You gave him time, space, respect. Many men are rarely listened to without interruption or expectation. Experiencing that kind of attention leaves an imprint. He felt seen, and being seen is addictive. You showed him that love is consistency in small things, remembering, following through, being where you said you'd be, saying what you meant and meaning what you said. You didn't build connection through grand promises. You built it through reliability, and reliability creates trust faster than intensity ever could. There's research that shows trust is formed not through big moments, but through repeated micro actions. You embodied that truth. You didn't fluctuate emotionally to keep him engaged. You were steady, predictable in the best way, safe, and safety is where real intimacy grows. You taught him that love doesn't require self-betrayal. You never asked him to abandon his values to keep you. You never demanded he become someone else to earn your affection. You encouraged growth, but you respected his autonomy. That showed him that love isn't about control. It's about alignment. You also taught him that love has limits. That caring deeply doesn't mean tolerating everything. That boundaries are not threats, they're definitions. You demonstrated that saying no can coexist with love. That walking away from what hurts doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you care enough to protect what matters. That lesson lands slowly, often after you're gone, because only then does he realize how rare it was to be loved by someone who didn't need to dominate, manipulate, or lose themselves to stay connected. Only then does he understand that what you offered wasn't common affection. It was mature love, grounded love, the kind that builds instead of consumes. You didn't love him to be needed. You loved him to be met. And that distinction matters. You taught him that love isn't urgency, it's presence. Not obsession, but attention. Not fear of loss, but appreciation of now. You weren't constantly afraid of him leaving, and that allowed him to stay more fully. Because pressure suffocates connection, and you never made love feel like a test he could fail at any moment. You let love breathe. You also modeled self-love without arrogance. You took care of yourself. You honored your emotions. You respected your time. You didn't make him responsible for your happiness, and that taught him something powerful. That love works best when two whole people come together, not when one tries to fill the other's emptiness. That realization reshapes expectations. After you, he notices the difference. He feels it when love comes with anxiety instead of peace, when affection feels conditional, when communication feels like a power struggle. Even if he can't name it, his body remembers what it felt like to be loved without tension, and memory is stubborn. You taught him that love doesn't keep score. You didn't track who gave more, who texted last, who tried harder. You showed up because you wanted to, not because you were afraid of losing. That freedom made your love feel genuine, and genuine love is unmistakable once experienced. You also taught him accountability without humiliation. When something mattered, you spoke up, calmly, directly. You didn't attack his character, you addressed behavior. That taught him that love can be honest without being cruel. That truth doesn't have to wound to be real. That changes how someone communicates forever. Even if he didn't change fast enough, even if he didn't rise fully to meet you, the lessons still landed. Because real love doesn't need to be fully understood to be felt. It settles into the nervous system. It becomes a reference point, a quiet benchmark that everything else gets compared to. Years later, he might not remember every conversation. He might forget specific moments, but he will remember how it felt to be with you. The calm, the clarity, the respect, the sense that love didn't require him to lose himself or perform endlessly. And that feeling becomes the standard. You didn't just show him affection. You showed him integrity in love. You showed him that love can be kind without being weak, strong without being harsh, intimate without being consuming. You showed him that real love is not about possession or fear, but about mutual choice, mutual growth, and mutual respect. And once someone learns that lesson, truly learns it, they can't unlearn it. They may try to settle. They may try to convince themselves that less is enough, but something inside them knows better now because of you. You didn't just love him, you taught him what love actually is, and that knowledge stays with him long after everything else fades. And when everything settles, when the noise fades, and the distance creates clarity, what remains is not regret alone, but understanding, because you were never just a chapter in his life. You were a turning point. You loved without losing yourself. You saw what he could become before he believed it. You brought peace into spaces that once felt heavy. You walked away with dignity when staying would have meant self-betrayal. And through all of that, you taught him what real love actually is, not through force, not through fear, but through presence, respect, and truth. That kind of love doesn't disappear when a relationship ends. It reshapes, it recalibrates, it becomes a quiet standard that everything else is measured against. Long after the conversations stop, long after time creates distance, the impact remains. Because real love doesn't ask to be remembered. It leaves a mark simply by being real. Not everyone is ready for a love like yours. Not everyone will rise to meet it. But that was never a failure. It was a reflection of timing, growth, and readiness. Your role was not to shrink so someone else could feel comfortable. Your role was to be fully yourself, and in doing so, you changed him. Some people enter our lives to stay, others enter to teach. You did both. You showed him what love can be when it is grounded, respectful, and strong enough to stand on its own. And whether he honors that lesson or carries it quietly, it lives within him now. So don't question your worth. Don't wonder if it mattered. It did. You were the kind of love that doesn't fade. You were the kind of love that transforms.